Printmaking with Fine Art Paper, sponsored by Datacolor and Red River Paper. Just to let you know, I'm a fine art photographer, commercial photographer. I live near Los Angeles, Southern California, of course. And it's a nice sunny day, and I just want to apologize in advance a little bit. You may hear birds outside my window because spring has sprung in California. I hope it comes to you soon wherever you are. I'd like to make a comment about the first image on this on the first slide. This was taken in the Antelope Slot Canyons in the Southwest. It's in the Navajo Nation, and it's in Utah, near Page. It's actually near Page, Arizona. Pardon me. And the interesting thing about this shot is that this is a canyon that's deep underground. All of these formations that you see are carved by water. So periodically during what they call monsoon season, which is during the summertime, the water rushes through this canyon, which is 30 or 40 or 50 feet deep, at very high speed and carves the stone into amazing shapes. And so this shot is taken looking pretty much straight up, looking partly through two holes that open to the outside air way above the point of view of the camera. So I thought you might find this interesting. Very much a monochromatic image, but lots of texture, lots of really cool lines. Really great place to go. Let's talk a little bit about success with printing, sort of the view from 20,000 feet. Fine art printing has evolved and improved way beyond the traditional methods, in my opinion. And part of this improvement is the issue of control, and Wikipedia said it really well, that artists can take total control of the production of their images, including the final color correction and the substrates being used. In other words, you don't have to hand. You can, but you don't have to hand off your printmaking to somebody else. And when you do take control of your printmaking, you have a very, very wide range of media types, from very glossy, almost metallic-looking papers, all the way to papers that almost look like fabric, either cotton rag or linen, for example. And so the creative latitude that you have is significantly improved over what it was even 5 years ago, much less 10 years ago. So we have traditional fine art papers and watercolor papers, treated and untreated canvas, papers that resemble traditional darkroom media, fabrics, and much, much more. And ink and paper combinations are now rated to be fade resistant beyond 200 years in proper storage. So here's a thought for you. Prints are probably the best way to archive your images. If you think about digital storage and how fickle that can be, we don't really know, as digital storage keeps getting changed and upgraded or morphed, we really don't know how long things are going to last on digital storage. We have an idea that it will be a long time, but it's not really proven yet. On the other hand, we've got some really good testing systems going now, including those by Henry Wilhelm and others, that tell us that a lot of these prints will go beyond 200 years in proper storage, which would be light-proof and air-proof and stored in archival type media, like an archival box and sealed against the elements and air and things like that. So one of the things that I've done that you may want to consider is making some prints and putting them away in a cool, dry place as a way of archiving them for the future. One of the things I think is very important with printing is to begin with the end in mind, and that even extends to thinking about how you're going to make that print when you have the camera in your hand. Is it going to be on a painterly watercolor type paper, or is it going to be on a really high gloss metallic finish or something in between, canvas? And what is it going to look like? And that may drive your decisions about how you're going to use light, what your exposure is going to look like, what you think your dynamic range is going to be in camera, and how that's going to translate on paper. And so beginning with the end in mind is really, really important. And for me, serious photography finishes with a print. Personally, and some people disagree with me, but personally I feel that if I haven't made a print with it, I haven't finished the job. Because printing gives another opportunity for personal expression and creativity and artistry. It's one of those things where if it's on an electronic display, it sort of stops. Electronic display to me is an electronic display. On the other hand, There are dozens and dozens of media types that I can experiment with and try things. In fact, I was doing this yesterday with a portrait print that I was making for a customer. And I tried it on a luster paper, and then I tried it on a fine art paper just to see what the difference was. And in fact, in that particular case, I liked that. It was a fairly high contrast image. I liked it on the luster paper better. So you have to plan a print. There are some design concepts. You have to have some sense of design in terms of what you want to represent on paper and how you're going to handle, for example, leading lines like you see in the photograph on the right, textures like you see in the bushes on the left side of that photograph, the use of light and shadow, those kinds of things. It's important to think about display calibration because displays, there's really two elements of displays that are very, very important in terms of printmaking. One of them, of course, is color, and the other is dynamic range. That's a range from shadow to highlight, shadow detail, highlight detail. And so display calibration helps you control both of those and can be very important to your ultimate success in making a print. Next, we go on to image processing and post-production. This is another topic that we're going to talk about a little bit more later today. We're going to go through some examples of paper types. One important thing that we want to talk about is the concept of soft proofing, which I call live preview. Soft proofing is something of an esoteric term that's a holdover from the days of four-color press. What it really means is that you have a live preview of what your print is going to look like when it comes off the printer, and we'll show you how to set that up and how to use it. We'll talk a bit about setting up your printer, creating custom profiles for your printer. Creating custom profiles for your printer can be very important to your success as a printmaker. Media and paper selection, we'll talk about that a little bit. That's a very, very broad topic that can almost be a webinar in itself. And then finishing and finishing up. So if you're planning a print, the process begins with the image capture. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Many images are taken at the edge of the camera's abilities, and you have to be thinking about color saturation and highlight and shadow detail. One of the things about this image on the right that I like very much, makes it very pleasing to me, is the contrast of light and shadow, both from the foreground and the background, the preservation of texture in brightly lit areas, and also that the fact that the clouds in the sky held up in this exposure along with the darker areas down below. And so the dynamic range and the balance on paper of this image are really quite nice, and it's very pleasing to look at. When you're selecting materials, of course, you want to think about the color palette, brightness and saturation, the exhibition or display conditions, and of course durability and longevity. Some papers are going to last longer than others. Generally speaking, conventional wisdom in any case, conventional wisdom is that the glossy and the luster media types may last longer simply because they have a more durable surface than, say, a fine art cotton rag paper. You also want to have some resources to back you up, and that means some of the companies that provide support and education materials, which includes Red River and Datacolor. You really want to have some resources to back you up and help you plan your print, both from the standpoint of managing your tools, your camera and your display and such, but also in terms of making decisions on media types and how you're going to make your print. Now, in terms of planning a print, I think it's important to keep things simple, or at least simplify the image as much as you can to its main components or its main elements so that the eye is drawn to the things that are important. You want to watch your backgrounds and corners. It's really important to make sure that there isn't something in the background that's distracting to the eye, that there are things in the corners placed where you want them to be. Keep in mind that the rule of thirds is a very, very good tool for you. The rule of thirds, of course, is those, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4 intersecting lines that give you intersections, if you follow my cursor, here, approximately here, here, and here. And you can see this tree is located on one of the intersections of the rule of thirds, and this peak here is on the other intersection of the rule of thirds. They can be very useful in helping you balance the masses and the shapes and the forms and the textures in your print. Color rendering and interpretation. This one is rendered pretty much intended for fine art paper. It's got very much a pastel or painterly look to it in a lot of ways, particularly in the upper, say, 3/4 of the print. Very dreamlike with the clouds coming through between the mountaintops. And so, you know, when you're thinking about color rendering and interpretation, that may be part of your media selection. Lighting. The lighting on this day was very overcast, snowing intermittently, light flurries and spits of snow. Pretty cold. This is from Zion National Park, by the way. You want to be thinking about your subject and how you're going to connect the feelings that you have about that subject for your viewer in the print. How you're going to connect that viewer to how you are feeling or what you want them to feel when they view the image. There's also, in planning the print, the wow factor. Are you making a photograph of something that's a little bit ordinary or it's been seen before, or are you making a print that you're taking a different viewpoint and it really gives somebody the opportunity to go, wow, that's really different, or wow, that's very cool, I've never seen that before. Think about lines and curves in terms of leading lines, intersection of lines. One of the things I like about this image is you can see that a line coming down from this peak and a line coming down from this peak intersect on this very cool tree right down at the bottom. You're going to think about composition overall with artistic intent. In other words, it's not enough just to frame the subject in the center of the picture, as we all know, but that you really want to compose the image. Again, think of the rule of thirds and think about what you want to express or how you want to represent that subject on paper or on screen. And so that artistic intent, that composition, becomes part of planning your print. We're also going to be thinking about material selection, including what I call independent paper types. Independent paper types are papers that are offered by parties that don't make printers. Red River is a good example. In image processing or post-production for print, some of the things that you're going to want to do is first calibrate your display, and we're going to talk about that soon. For the most part, I think people are going to be shooting raw files nowadays. It's important to keep your adjustments focused and subtle, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. But first of all, small adjustments go a long way. It doesn't really make sense to jam through the adjustments and hope for the best. It makes a lot more sense to make one small adjustment, then make another small adjustment, and see how they add up, because the additive effect, it may not just be an added effect, it may be a multiplier. So keep them focused and subtle and see how it goes and make decisions as you go rather than overcommitting and then having to back up. I think that that's a little bit destructive to the creative process. I think the creative process can be very step-by-step and feeling your way with focused and subtle moves rather than big moves. Address significant issues from the ground up. If you've got an issue, for example, on the macro level, which, for example, is maybe the exposure is a little bit too low, you want to make that adjustment before you go to local adjustments or touch-ups. In Photoshop, you want to work in layers. Layers are really the heart of Photoshop, adjustment layers, and good Lord, I could go all day about layers. But in any event, work in layers, and that includes your adjustment layers and your retouch layers. In Lightroom, think about using virtual copies. That's another subject unto itself. It's one of the major strengths of the application. And I take a sip of water. Now, the variations on a single image might include color saturation, sharpening, adjustment for different media types, and things like that. And of course, I want you to think about using the live preview or soft proofing functions, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, I'm pretty sure that you all know about Adobe Camera Raw and about making adjustments. I have a couple of global adjustments that I've made here, and I want to illustrate the point that the exposure adjustment that I made was very small. It's only about half an exposure value. Okay. And I made relatively small adjustments in clarity and vibrance. And of course, I can undo these as I'm working on a raw file. This is a focus that was taken near my home on a stormy day. In fact, this frame is part of a time-lapse series that I took. I don't want to go very far with the adjustments on this, partly because, as you can see, we have a very wide dynamic range. We have very deeply shadowed areas down here in the lower left, and then we have clouds with lots of highlights, and I want to try and preserve as much of that detail as I can. So I know from the get-go that if I really horse these sliders back and forth, I'm going to start losing some of the detail in the image, or it's going to distort the image. So I'm taking small steps and evaluating the results as I go so that I can be in control of the process. I want to show you one of my favorite adjustments here. One of the things that's offered, and this is also offered in Lightroom, if you go to the HSL Grayscale tab in Camera Raw, you'll see there's 3 tabs for hue and saturation and luminance. And I don't use the hue and saturation tabs. I use the hue tab almost never, the saturation tab very rarely, but I use the luminance tabs, particularly in landscapes, fairly often. You can see what I did here was I brought the blues a little bit darker to create a little more contrast in the sky behind the clouds. It makes for a more dramatic photograph. It doesn't take a lot. I probably did a little bit too much on this one, but you do get the point that there's a tool there that's available to you that's very, very cool. It gives you a lot of control over your images in RAW. Here's the same thing on Luminance panel in Lightroom. We're in the Develop module, and I cranked up the reds a little bit. Again, probably a little bit too, definitely cranked them down, sorry. To make a point, you can see in the comparisons here between areas that there's a definite effect on parts of this image. Certainly the top of the sign is affected by this, and some parts of the neon are affected by this. And so if you push it too far, you can perhaps have a negative effect on the image. Let's talk for a minute about display calibration. This is taken from Hunts Mesa in the Monument Valley. This is an image by a friend of mine, Rick Russell, an excellent 4x5 photographer. He shoots on film all the time. These are scanned to digital and then printed on an Epson 3880. He typically uses fine art papers, a wide variety of fine art papers. And this image is particularly dramatic. I don't even know if you can see it, but this tiny dot right here is a pickup truck, right at the head of the mouse cursor. Gives you an idea of the scale of the photograph. It's huge. Now, what's display calibration? Let's start off by talking about a brand new display. In fact, I just got one yesterday via FedEx, a device that I'm going to be testing. And they come out of the box and they are typically too bright and too blue. They're set up at the factory simply to test for basic performance. They come out, they're bright, they're set very bright with the assumption that the display is going to be used in a very bright office. And they're a little bit blue, partly because that's the way the eye works when it's working in very bright light. And it's partly because that they haven't calibrated the display, so it tends to look blue to the eye. And you really want to get that under control. And one of the most common complaints that I hear from people is that my prints are too dark. Now think about that. Why would the prints be too dark after they've been edited? It was because the display was too bright. So if the display is too bright, you're pushing the prints down in terms of luminance. You're pushing the image down in terms of luminance, and the prints are going to look too dark. So the first thing to look at when the prints are too dark is to go back to the display and recalibrate it. Now let me give you an idea of what the numeric values would mean in that case. If the display is too bright out of the box, it's typically running at somewhere between 250 to 300 candelas. Now a candela is a measurement of light falling or being emitted, depending on how you look at it. And candelas per square meter at 300 is so bright that you would almost have to be in a room that was lit completely corner to corner on the ceiling with fluorescent light bulbs to be able to see the screen properly. The value that you need for a good screen to print match is almost a third of that. It's 120. So you've really got to get screen brightness under control for a good printmaking experience. At 120, you're going to preserve your view of the highlight detail, and your shadows will be represented pretty much as accurately as they can be on an electronic display. Now, the way this works is that it generates, the software generates a series of color patches, which you can see on this screen, and the colorimeter, the Spyder device, is suspended on the screen. It's touching the screen and laying flat against it. And as these colors are displayed, the Spyder is going to read the results of each patch. There's quite a few of them. And it's going to say, well, that patch looked okay, but this patch, this red patch, is a little bit too orange, so we need to correct that. And it's going to save those results in what's called a profile. And that profile is going to be applied to your video card, your graphics card, and your display every time you boot up your computer after that. And that way you will get accurate color, and of course it's going to do a test for brightness. You'll get accurate brightness as well. Here's what one of the first screens looks like in the Spyder 4 Elite software. I want to point out that there's several things going on here. We have a wide gamut RGB LED display, and we're going to do a full calibration. And these are the standard settings. If you have a device where you're using to calibrate your display, the standard settings, accepted settings are gamma of 2.2, that's recommended. A white point of 6500, that's recommended, and a brightness level of 120, that's 120 candelas per square meter. And those will get you in the neighborhood for a good screen to print match. Now, one of the other screens that we have, SpyderProof, gives you a comparison between the calibrated view, which you see here on the larger screen, and an uncalibrated view, which you see here on the lower right. Looking on the lower right, and I've enlarged this so you can see some of the details, you can see that the grass doesn't really look natural, and neither does the sky. Even the stone in the church is a pink instead of a reddish color. And then if we come back over here, you can look at these squares again and see that the green is very natural and vibrant, almost an emerald color. And the blue in the sky is very intense. This was taken, I believe, in Arizona at a fairly high altitude, so the sky is quite intense. You can see the red brick in the church. Notice the black and white segments and how neutral they are. There is no color cast in any of these. There's good mid-tone transitions. For example, this light shadow on the cheekbone going across to underneath the eye is very clean and very natural. The detail on the stairs in the mid-tones is very good, as it is in the brighter lit areas. Up here you can see that the skin tones are quite natural. And so in the calibrated state, the display looks quite good and pretty much represents what your eye would see in the real world. Now, soft proofing or live color preview, this is one of those things that if you take something away from this session, I would really like you to remember this. The live color preview is your guide to the future. Live color preview and soft proofing, I use those terms interchangeably even though Adobe does not. Soft proofing enables you to see what's going to happen to your print before you print it. And how does one do that? In Photoshop, you go to, and this is CS6, you would go to View and to Proof Setup and to Custom. Now, for those of you who are frantically writing this down, I want to remind you that we record these webinars, and this will be posted on our website in the next few days. So you go View, Proof Setup, Custom, and then this dialog will pop up, and you're going to go Device to Simulate, and you can see that this is the Red River San Gabriel fiber for the Epson 3880. This happens to be their profile that's posted on their website. I downloaded it. And what that will do is Photoshop is going to use this printer profile and make it do double duty. It's going to give you a look at the image as it will print. So when I click OK and I go back to this screen and I'm looking at the image, I'm going to know that this detail is going to hold up, the detail in the eye is going to hold up, the flower is going to look decent. I'm not going to lose parts of this image due to the fact that I've been editing it. I usually start this before I do the editing process so I can see it every step of the way. It's really an important aspect of this. This doubles the amount of control that you have over the final outcome. So if you were simply working on your image and you were going along and you went to make a print, the cycle that most people get into is what I call print, tweak, where you make a print, you come back to the screen, you look at the screen, you look at the print, you go, that's not it, make make a tweak, make an adjustment, make another print. A lot of people will do 3, 4, 5 print tweak cycles. Now, if you think just about 8 by 10 paper at, say, $1 or $1.50 a page, depending on the type, pretty soon you're into some real money just to get one 8 by 10, never mind a 16 by 20 sheet. So soft proofing is your friend. Soft proofing keeps you out of trouble. Soft proofing shows you the right road to take. Soft proofing makes it easy for you to make editing decisions. So we have a comparison here, A versus B, and I've exaggerated these so you can see them via your internet browser a little more easily. This might be a glossy or luster paper. You can see it has deep shadows, good, really strong contrasty blacks and midtones, really vibrant saturated colors. And then over here, this might be an example of a fine art cotton or other type of watercolor paper where it's much more painterly, a little more pastel looking. You can see that you're starting to lose some of the detail in some of the really saturated areas like this yellow-orange flower. Colors may shift a little bit. And now I think you can see the importance of soft proofing or live preview in that if you were editing the image and you were making decisions based on, say, this view, which is going to be fairly close to an uncalibrated view or a monitor that was calibrated a few months ago, let's say. It's out of whack but not real bad. But if you're working on a fine art paper, you can't really tell what it's going to look like until you print it at all. So you really need that live preview to help guide you towards your final destination. How do you set this up? Here's Lightroom 5, and we're in the Develop module, and you can see on the lower left here it says Soft Proofing. If I click on this, this is going to enable soft proofing. I'm going to show you another screen in a second. You can also go Command or Control P. I'm sorry, S. I made a mistake. Command or Control S, and that will enable soft proofing. When you have soft proofing running, you're going to see a tick mark here. You're going to see soft proofing above the histogram, and your histogram is going to change. Your histogram is going to adapt to the way that print is going to be rendered based on the color profile for the paper. And you can see down here, it says Profile, and there's 2 little arrows, and if I click on that, there's a drop-down of all of the paper profiles that I imported into Lightroom earlier. And what you'll see if you click on this is you'll see the ones that you've imported earlier, and you'll see another choice that says Other. When you click on Other, it will take you to the folder on your computer that stores all your print profiles, and you can choose to incorporate that profile into Lightroom. So now I have Ultra Pro Satin from Red River, and you can see that it's pretty highly saturated, it's pretty bright, needs a little bit of adjusting in terms of contrast and maybe some color saturation, but it's in the neighborhood. Now I'm going to go to, and watch this area right in the center carefully. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Watch this area in the center carefully. I'm going to switch to a different paper and see how that changed. This is their art paper. This is the white version of their fine art paper, and you can see right in the center here that this changed pretty dramatically from here. See how it fades out? So, and the colors are slightly shifted. It's a little more pink and a little less red. Now, of course, one can make adjustments to compensate for this, but at least you know it's going to happen. Now you're in a position to go to the controls in Lightroom and adjust the image and get yourself in a position to make a good print, hopefully on the first try. So soft proofing or live preview is your friend. You use the printer profile to help you view that on your screen, and then you can go forward with your editing with confidence that you're going to get the result that you want. Let's talk for a moment about setting up your printing. The printer needs a bit of TLC, and I think people forget that. A lot of us are busy during the week, and we can only, get to the printer on the weekend or every other weekend. And it's important to exercise the printer at least a couple of times a week. Make a small print or a test pattern, and the reason you want to do that, particularly if you're in a dry climate or if you're in a hot, humid climate and you're inside in air conditioning, is that low humidity tends to dry out the print heads. The ink has an aqueous base. A lot of that is water, and that dries out and leaves behind the little particles of pigment. Most printers are pigment printers nowadays. leaves behind those little particles of pigment, and they tend to block up the print head. When you exercise the printer, it pushes ink through the print head and keeps it clean and running smoothly. If you get the urge to use third-party inks, let's say you go to a big box store and they say, well, we have inks that work really well in an HP printer, we have inks that really work well in an Epson printer, or we can refill your cartridges, I think you should lie down till the urge passes, because those third-party inks aren't designed for the system in your printer. It will void your warranty if you're still under warranty, and it will definitely give you an unexpected result if you try to use the printer manufacturer's profiles, or even someone else's profiles. Say the profiles provided by Red River will not work with third-party inks in most cases. So you really want to use factory fresh ink, and you want to store the paper in the factory package. And why do you want to do that? Exposure to air and air pollution and changes in temperature all have an impact on paper quality and how the print is going to turn out eventually. So throwing it in a box that's not closed and tossing it under the bed or in the back of the closet is probably not a good idea. What you want to do is put it in a cool, dry place that's protected from dust, air pollution, heat, insects, or anything else that can damage the paper. Now, let's talk for a minute about custom profiles for your printer. You know, every printer is unique, and the printer manufacturers are making printers now that are much more stable than they were in the past. And so the profiles that come from the manufacturers work pretty darn well, but they are made only for the printer manufacturer's papers. So if you buy an Epson printer and you're limiting yourself to using their papers, their profiles, their printer, their paper, you're kind of locked into a limited set of options. The next step would be to go to, say, Red River Paper, which has a range of papers that compete and in some ways expand on the range of papers that are available through the printer manufacturer. Well, that's pretty good. That's a good thing. That gives you more latitude in terms of your artistic latitude. I'm sorry if I repeated myself. It gives you more latitude in terms of your creativity. It gives you more choices. Frequently, it costs less and delivers the same or better quality. But then you have to think about, how do I profile that paper? Well, Red River supplies profiles for their papers. They're excellent profiles. There's one thing about that there's two things about that you need to think about. The first is that Red River Paper doesn't have access to your printer on your desk. The second thing is that customization of that profile. In other words, making subtle changes to that profile. For example, if you're printing on black and white, to add a tint to the profile so it's a slightly sepia tone, things like that. Difficult to impossible. So you may want to think about, in terms of creating different kinds of prints, expanding the range of things that you can do, and getting into custom profiles which are tailored to your individual printer on your desktop in your conditions, using your media that's sitting in your storage cabinet. Now, the media selection, you have glossy and luster papers, which we're all familiar with. There are some relatively new special finished papers such as metallics, which are very contrasting and very what I call sharp edged. In other words, the contrast lines and the differences in between objects, for example, architectural lines, will be very sharp edged and distinct. You have watercolor style papers or fine art papers. The ink spreads out a little bit more on the paper. They're softer and painterly. They have a little bit less dynamic range in many cases. And in any case, in all of these papers, the performance characteristics require a profile to get best results. Excuse me, please. Okay, let's just slide down here. Now, some of the papers that you might want to be thinking about, I'm going to name some names here from Red River, and I encourage you to go to their website. And, you know, God's in the details here. You really need to look at each one that you might be interested in and look at the performance details. You might want to think about getting a sample pack. Polar Pearl Metallic pretty much speaks for itself. Be a very bright, contrasty, metallic finished paper. Pecos River Gloss, a glossy paper, Ultra Pro Satin, it's one of their most popular papers. They have River Linen, which is almost like a fabric. Aurora Art White, which I mentioned earlier, is one of the profiles. Actually comes in 2 shades, white, and then a more natural, which means a sort of a slight ivory tone to it, if that makes sense. But again, the performance characteristics frequently require profiling. So how do you do that? You start off with the SpyderPRINT software, which is a product that we offer, and the SpyderPRINT reader. And you're going to start off, one of the first screens you're going to see is you're going to specify which printer, you're going to specify the paper and the ink set, etc., the date. And the reason you're doing this is that the target that you're going to print, which I'm going to jump ahead to in just a second, the target you're going to print is going to have all of this information printed on it for your reference. So this is what the target looks like. Now, I imagine that a lot of you are having an aha moment here. This is pretty much the same principle that's used when you're calibrating your display. We're going to take a series of standardized color patches and we're going to read them with an instrument and determine the variance between the standardized color value and the delivered color value and make corrections that will help us get better control over the output device. So again, color calibration is your friend. It's going to bring the printer into line. First of all, you're going to get better screen to print match, but you're also going to get accurate colors. So green grass is going to look green, blue skies are going to look blue, skin tones are going to look like they're supposed to look, etc., etc. So here we are back to our beginning screen. If you click next, you have the option to choose between a number of targets. My personal preference is use the high quality target plus the grays. You'll get a lot of intermediate gray patches, and it's going to give you, first of all, better neutral tones, but it's also going to improve performance across the board in terms of color accuracy. And so that's 225 patches on 2 sheets. To print that and to read it takes less than 15 minutes with a little bit of practice. I'm going to jump ahead again and give you a look at what that looks like. So here's our panel where we've decided what we're going to print. We've printed out the page, and here is the SpyderPRINT device. It's set up in an easel, so it's easy to scan across each strip, and we're going to read each of those strips in turn. It's going to read the results into the computer and calculate the corrections. Now, when you go to print these targets, you have to print them without color management. Why is that? Because basically you want what I call naked printer performance. You want the printer to be unaffected by any of the software controls that might be running on the computer. So you're going to want to see, and it depends on the printer and the dialog boxes, but this is the message that you want to see before you print those targets. You want to see the driver color management is off. You don't have any paper presets, any color management, any profiles enabled. Now, this is a media type, not an actual paper selection. We're selecting this paper because of the type of finish that it has, this paper type, and because of its thickness. So we're telling the computer what type of paper it has, not the actual paper that's being loaded. That comes later. Now, one of the things that you can do if you happen to have it, there are some printers that don't allow you to turn off color management anymore. There is some stuff on the boards about Canon, for example, and some of the printers that they've come out with recently, which can be a problem. There is a workaround. Adobe Labs makes the Adobe Color Printer utility. All you have to do is go to the Datacolor folder on your computer, find the targets that you want to print, open them with the Color Printer utility, and print them. They will print without color management, and then you can scan them accurately. Again, here's the color target. You can have anywhere from 1 to many, many pages. I find that 225 patches gives an excellent result. There are some devices out there that will try to do this with fewer patches. I'm not particularly happy with the outcomes from that. I think 225 is pretty much the sweet spot. You might want to check that out for yourself, but I think that 225 patches with the intermediate tones and the iterative gray, the gray balance patches really get you where you need to be in terms of color accuracy and managing dynamic range in your print. So again, just to review, the principles are similar to your display. You're going to print a series of color patches and create what's called an ICC profile. Same thing as, it's named the same kind of thing. Sorry, the name sounds like the same kind of thing, but the ICC profile for your printer is different than the ICC profile for your display. They are device related. They're not interchangeable. So you can't use a display profile for printing. Some people try to do that. You'll get an unexpected result. What you are going to get is you're going to get improved color accuracy, better shadow and highlight detail, better mid-tone transitions and more, and of course your screen-to-print match will improve. Now, creating your fine art print, this is another important milestone in this webinar. When you go to, say, the print module in Lightroom and you go to Print Job and go down to Color Management, okay, you can see that it says Profile Managed by Printer. Now, that will do a decent job, but not a great job. A decent job, and this is important, pretty much limited to the papers that the manufacturer supplies. But a decent job and not a great job because the brain in the printer is about the size of a flea. It's not very powerful. It can't do a lot in terms of adapting. It's just not what you want for really high-end printmaking. So managed by printer, you're going to get an okay result, an average result. What you really want to do is take control of it and use the big brain in your computer and use the color profile. Here we've got the Ultra Pro Satin queued up, and we do have a preview of the image on screen here. We've got it set for rendering intent of perceptual. Some people prefer relative rendering intent. It's not a big deal to experiment between them. It'll cost you one sheet of paper. Some images will do a little bit better with one than the other. In fact, I had that issue yesterday. I wound up printing in relative intent. But the important thing is that you're using that color profile and using the big brain in your computer to drive the end result. And you're definitely going to see improvements in print quality when you use a color-managed, application-managed print process, an application-managed print process. It's going to send better information to the printer. It's going to make better calculations. You're going to get a better result. When you click on Printer in Lightroom, this is one of the dialogues that come up. And again, you can see I'm choosing a paper type, not a paper per se. We already chose the actual paper when we chose the profile. This is telling it that we're in the neighborhood of gloss and luster papers, and we're going to send it 16-bit output. Now, you have to know that that's a little bit of a marketing thing. The 16-bit output does get converted to 8-bit along the way. If you click on 16-bit output, it gets converted a little bit later in the transformation process to printer output. But at the end of the day, you only see a small difference in some prints and certainly not across the board. I typically print at 1440 on the Epson printers. 2880 doesn't seem to give much of an improvement in quality. It does take twice as long and uses more ink, at least according to some people. And so I find Superfine will give an excellent result 99% of the time. Typically, you don't want to go to high speed. That will shortchange you on print quality. Flip horizontal, obviously, by circumstances. Finest detail, I only use that if I'm seeing, for example, faint horizontal lines on the print. That may mean that there's an issue with how the print head is laying down ink on the paper, or it may be an issue with the speed of the printer head over the paper and how it's laying down the ink. When you click on finest detail, it tends to slow down and make more passes. And so in some cases, a minority, you may get a better print, a better result from your print. Now again, you can see that the Epson driver color management is off. That's because we selected a paper profile. Okay. Now Epson is suggesting their own paper, of course, but we are using a Red River paper in this case. Now, here's what the CS6 main print dialog looks like. It's quite a bit different than Lightroom, but you'll see that the same tools are all here. What we do get is we get a color accurate preview. This is a soft proofing preview based on the color handling. Slightly different name. It doesn't say profile. It says color handling. It says Photoshop manages colors, and it says printer profile. We've got Red River Ultra Pro Satin on the Epson 3880. So that's their profile. Very nice, complete name. We're going to do normal printing with perceptual rendering intent. And here's your last look at what that print's supposed to look like. It looks pretty good, doesn't it? So again, remember that you don't want to be using printer managed color if you can avoid it. What you want to do is have a profile that's specific to the ink and paper combination that you're using at the time. So some printing tips. I strongly encourage you to use the manufacturer's inks. Use the best inkjet paper that matches your needs and budget. I also encourage you to try new printing media. And again, you know, the picture police will not come to your house if you do this. It's really a fun exercise. Print the same image on 3 different types of paper and see what the differences are. And I encourage you to look, you know, this is an image that's got a lot of really fine details and subtleties and, you know, contrasting or complementary colors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And printing this on a luster paper is a different world than printing this on a fine art watercolor paper. They look completely different. And it's hard, I like them both. It's hard to decide which one I like better. But it's important for you to get the experience of working with the actual papers. That soft proof on your screen is going to be in the neighborhood, but there's nothing like holding a printed page in your hand that you finished and that you feel good about. Use a daylight balanced lighting source or a light box for viewing and evaluation. If you're viewing your prints under, say, a typical curlicue fluorescent bulb or an old style incandescent bulb or fluorescent tubes, you're going to see color shifts in the print. The pigments in these inks are sensitive to the type of light that they're seeing, and they will, the color will get what's called metamerism. We'll get some color shifts. And you won't get the full benefit of being able to evaluate the print and, if necessary, go back and make artistic changes and things like that. So a daylight balanced lighting, using daylight balanced lighting or a light box is very important. You can get pretty decent color balanced desktop lamps for under $100, and I would argue that you would probably pay for that in the first couple of months that you have it. Now let's talk about finishing and finishing up. When you're finished with your print, you think you're finished with your print, I want you to look closely at the color saturation. You want to look at those colors and make sure that the color saturation isn't too much. Oversaturated color may look great at a distance, but when you get closer you may find that the details are blocking up because there's too much ink being put down to achieve that level of saturation. You're going to look at density in terms of availability of detail, whether the density is appropriate to the subject and it's representing the subject accurately. You want to look at highlight and shadow detail, and that's one of the images I put, that's one of the reasons I put this image in here, is that it's got a pretty decent dynamic range, and you can see that the detail holds up in all but the very extreme parts of the image in terms of highlight and shadow detail, even on a computer screen. You're going to want to look at your mid-tone transitions. In particular, when you're going, for example, up this column, whoops, didn't mean to do that either. When you're going up this column and you're seeing that transition from here to here, those mid-tone transitions, or from here to here, you want to make sure that they're smooth, that you don't see gradients or pixelization, that sort of thing. And you want to look for artifacts, which I just mentioned. Change the media if you think the image quality is there but the print could be better. And once you get some experience using alternative papers, you're going to be able to see that pretty quickly. You're going to look at a print and you're going to say, you know, I printed this on a luster finished paper or a matte paper, and maybe something different would bring out some of the elements that I want to see and do a better job. and go ahead and make that change. And you can see that with a small print. You don't have to make a 20 by 30 to be able to see that sort of thing. When you've made the print, actually before you put the print in the paper and after you've made the print, handle it with care. You want to use lint-free gloves. Keep your fingers off the printed area because it's impossible to remove fingerprints from inkjet prints. Used to be in the days of analog printing, every once in a while you could remove a fingerprint, but nowadays not going to happen. On the fine art papers, the softer papers, you can ruin some of those paper types by dragging a fingernail across them. So be sure you handle them by the edges and corners. Wear those gloves. If you're going to stack them, use archival, what's called interleaving paper, which is thin tissue paper. You want to, particularly on Epson printers, but really on most printers, you want to outgas for 24 hours. And I forgot to mention this on the print target. It's a good idea to let that print target go 24 hours before you read it, because that aqueous solution that the pigments are suspended in needs to bleed off. It needs to evaporate and let the print settle. Now, modern printers are very stable. They're not going to have a big shift, which is called delta E, a big shift in color over the first 10 minutes or even over the first hour, but there is some change, and better to avoid it. Once you're ready to frame the print, if you frame the print as soon as you've printed it, that outgassing is probably going to coat the inside of the glass, particularly on the Epson papers. The Epson rep told me to wait 72 hours, and he said in the best possible case you want to put interleaving paper between the sheets, and that will help accelerate that process of outgassing. In some cases you want to varnish or coat the paper. You can get these varnishes and coats from a number of people. I prefer the ones that are water-based and not solvent-based. I don't like breathing in the solvents, and that's just me. I have, respiratory sensitivities. If you don't, then just make sure you're doing it in either in a ventilation booth or doing it outdoors where you have good ventilation. You can coat using a spray or a spray can or a spray gun, a brush or a roller. One tip, if you're using rollers to put a coating on, have 2 rollers handy. One for the coating itself, make a nice even coat. Have the other roller, which is lightly, damp, slightly wet, and use that to smooth the coating out and roll over the print, and you find that you get a smoother, better result if you have a second roller. For mounting, I'd like to see people use what's called a hinge mount with archival tape. I don't have a diagram handy, but it's basically 2 pieces of tape shaped into a letter T, and that letter T is used to attach the print to the mat board instead of hot mounting it or something like that. The print will last longer when it's mounted with a hinge mount, and if the mounting board or the mat is damaged, it's much easier to retrieve the print and remount it. And if it's permanently attached to a mat and the mat is damaged, you're in trouble. Now in framing, all the materials need to be archival. That includes all of the framing materials, the matting materials, and in many cases, if you're using a framer or you're framing yourself, people use what I call craft paper, which is brown looking, it's like wrapping paper. That craft paper is not acid-free and it's not archival. You want to have that back dust cover made out of material that's archival, so it's not bleeding acid fumes into the compartment where the print is stored. That won't be good for the print, and it will change colors and have other strange things happen to it over time. Now, we've done lots and lots and lots of webinars. I think we're way over 30 webinars. They are all recorded, and they're provided on our website. You can find them at spider.datacolor.com. We have them on photography issues, composition, architecture, the convergence of still and motion capture. We have been working on some video content, floral photography, architectural photography, a lot of different subjects. I encourage you to take advantage of it. See the website events page for the schedule. We're adding more every day. In fact, there will be a big change, a new schedule going up in the next couple of days. We're going to be at the National Association of Broadcasters meeting in Las Vegas at the beginning of April. If you're into video, videography, cinematography, broadcast, do come by and see us. We'll be there. And of course, we have a blog. I'm one of the contributors. I'm also the editor. We have a number of people, including David Toby, Sean Dugan, David Cardinal, Ken Skloot as our authors. They're all nationally known people. They're excellent writers and very, very good content. I encourage you to go there and take a look at that. Now, just give me a minute here. Okay. The websites are, and again, this is recorded, so you don't have to scribble down anything, but the websites, Datacolor, www.datacolor.com, or spider.datacolor.com. Either one will work. redrivercatalog.com for Red River paper. Discounts and rebates, we're offering 20% off all Datacolor Spider products purchased on our website. The discount code is paper20. It's valid through April 2nd. This is for the United States only. For Red River paper, $10 off a sample kit purchase. I can't think of a better way to get started on making some custom prints with some new papers. The coupon code is SPYDER4 at redrivercatalog.com, and that expires on April 17th. Our giveaways, we have a Datacolor SpyderPRINT and 2 $100 Red River paper gift certificates and a sample kit. The SpyderPRINT, and forgive me, Julie, if I pronounce your last name incorrectly, Julie Cousins, or Cousins, I suppose, and the 100 Red River certificate is Sally Paulson and Doug Peterson. Our marketing manager will be getting in touch with you via email to arrange delivery of these items. So please watch your email. If you don't receive the email very soon, do check the spam or junk folder, make sure that you did get it. I want to add a couple of things. I have a website at davidsaffer.com, and you can see some of my work and some of the things that I do. I also offer email access to my students, dsaffer@mac.com. I'm happy to answer questions. We did not have a second presenter today to answer questions. I apologize about that. If you do have a question that's important to you, please do send me an email. Keep in mind that I travel, things get busy, I may miss your email. If you don't see an answer from me within a day or two, send me another email and just jog my elbow. It probably got lost in the rush of things that are going on, and I'll do my best to answer you. I look forward to having you come back and join us again. Thanks for your attendance and your attention. Have a great day.